Okay, Sarah, you think
it's
okay to start?
Yeah, I think people can join, and with the announcements, we'll get through them and things.
Definitely, we won't miss Melissa. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the League of Women Voters League Talk, our first for the year 2024. I'm Suzanne Ellsbury, League President. League Talk is a virtual event open to all our members and supporters. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the League, which will be 104 years old next month, is a grassroots, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Although we take positions on issues and policies, we never endorse nor oppose political candidates or parties. In addition, the views or statements expressed by participants at this and all our educational events do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. If you're not a League member yet, we invite you to join us in our mission to empower voters and to protect democracy. And remember, the League is not for women only. You may become a member by visiting us at www.goleaguego.org or by getting in touch with our membership chair, Mary Condon. We're so delighted this evening to have Melissa Price Kromm, who will enlighten us on the new voting laws which will impact voting in our state. In particular, Senate Bill 747 and 749. North Carolina will hold its primary election on Tuesday, March 5th, to choose nominees for the general election. And of course, the general election, which includes the presidential preference primary, is Tuesday, November the 5th. County boards of elections begin mailing absentee ballots to eligible voters in 3 days, January 19th. And the deadline for voter registration is February 9th at 5 p.m. Okay, let's begin recognizing board members present this evening. Kate Stadelman is here, Sarah Basinger, and I see that we have our former president, Dolores Johnson-Hurt, and Lucille Howard is a former board member, and have special guest, our state president. We're honored to have Jennifer Rubin here with us. And let's see, is there anybody else that maybe, Mary Condon is our membership chair. She's here, she's on our board. She's new to our league and doing a fantastic job with membership. Yay. Okay, any elected officials or anybody that wants to be recognized before we move on? I haven't forgotten anybody. Any new members with us? Okay. Sarah Basinger is our voter editor and communications lead, as well as being on the state board. And Sarah's going to give us our announcements for upcoming events.
Thank you, Suzanne. So in addition to tonight, there's also a Improving Maternal Health for Black Women. It's a 2-part series. It's going on right now, and they have promised me that they are recording it, and I will make it available to all members. The second part of that happens on January 30th. It's, again, will be hybrid. In person is at Caldwell Presbyterian Church, and then online is on Facebook Live. On Thursday, Mary will be hosting the inaugural Sages event. And so for members who are 60 plus can come to gather at the league office for coffee, snacks, and fellowship. And we've had a good sign up, but feel free to go to goleaguego.org to sign up if that is of interest. The state tax policy team is going to have a webinar on January 23rd at 7 p.m. That's on our calendar online and in the newsletter. Also on the 24th at 6 p.m., there's a film called Racist Roots, Origins of North Carolina's Death Penalty. That'll be showing at the University City Regional Library. Then on the 25th from 3 to 4, the LWVUS has a webinar entitled Where Are Reproductive Rights Post-Dobbs? And that is, you can register online. Again, the links are on our website and in the newsletter, and that will be virtual, but you need to register ahead. And then on the 30th, we will have our book club. Our local LWV Charlotte-Mecklenburg book club will discuss The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGee. Last but not least, our Civics 101 program is back for 2024. And that begins on February 21st and runs for 6 consecutive Wednesdays until March 27th. Participants can come learn about local government, and the sessions include Mecklenburg County Board of Elections, county government, City of Charlotte government and towns, the North Carolina courts for District 26, and then the final session is a media panel with local media. So that, and again, you can register for that on goleaguego.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate that. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Melissa Price Kromm, Executive Director of North Carolina for the People. Following her talk, we'll go directly to Q&A for your questions. Melissa served as the lobbyist and leader of this state coalition for the past 12 years. She led efforts to pass financial disclosure reform, voting rights reform, and to end attacks on judicial independence. She's a frequent contributor to ncnewsline.com, a nonprofit news organization. Before her involvement with the coalition, she was part of a successful effort to pass same-day voter registration at North Carolina early voting sites and pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds. She's a graduate of North Carolina State University. Melissa has a passionate belief, and I quote, in freedom over fear, proof over accusations, country over party, and people over politics. Melissa, welcome. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm going to look at starting the screen share if that works with you guys. All right. This looks interesting. Let's escape out of this. Let's stop share and try again. Desktop share. All right. Now we're looking at it. All right. So I'm the executive director of the North Carolina for the People. We've actually been around for 25 years, and guess who we are founded by? The League of Women Voters, Democracy North Carolina, and Common Cause. We are the pro-democracy coalition here in North Carolina. We recently changed our name. We used to be North Carolina Voters for Clean Elections. That's how we got our start into this democracy work, talking about the need to get money out of politics. But as we all know, over the last 25 years, the attacks to our democracy have frankly quite grown a lot. It's not just big money in politics. It's attacks on voting rights. It's attacks on structural democracy. It's, gerrymandering. It's attacks on judicial independence and integrity. It's even attacks on our right to protest. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about kind of the legislative trends that we've been seeing and the initiatives that we're going to need to prepare for over the next cycle. Let's see. All right. So first of all, I'm going to start with attacks on voting rights. These are going to be your barriers to vote that are new coming up this year. First of all, I want to highlight that, you know that you're going to have to show a voter ID when you go vote. We just got through a municipal election doing that, but not everyone voted in that municipal election. So we're going to have to do a lot of education, making sure people know that they have to have an approved ID to go and vote. And this also is for, mail-in voting. There's also no rights restoration. Both of these are examples of the prevailing winds of the current Supreme Court. The voter ID case, as you know, was already decided, and with a new Republican majority on our Supreme Court, they decided to rehear that case. Fun fact, we don't normally rehear cases. But this current Supreme Court is deciding that they would like to rehear things like redistricting and Leandro, and I'll get to a little bit more of that later. Next, we're going to be, was a bill called Senate Bill 747. This was kind of the new monster voting bill that passed this year over the governor's veto. And you're going to see changes to how you vote by mail. One of the biggest changes is that the current legislature decided in all their wisdom to start throwing out ballots that come in after 7:30 on election day. We used to have a 3-day grace period. If this had been in place in 2020, over 13,000 ballots statewide would have been thrown away. This was passed in 2009 with overwhelming bipartisan support. But with a shift during the pandemic of people using mail voting and the prevalence of the and the dis and malinformation of election deniers, we saw attacks to how mail voting. Next, we also saw some changes to same-day voter registration. I know you guys mentioned in my intro, like that's how I kind of got my start in this. I met my husband doing this. There's quite literally a child in this world thanks to same-day voter registration. My youngest, who's 8. And so I really do care a lot about this. Now, the changes to same-day voter registration are pending current litigation. But the changes that are made kind of unfairly cancel people's ability to vote without them really being notified or given a chance to defend themselves. It used to be that you had like 2 cards mailed to your house, and now after the first one, they're going to pull your ballot. And so now we know that the reason why we would send multiple postcards is that it's frankly because sometimes the post service has issues. Some people register at colleges and mail gets lost. And so, as I said, there are pending litigations about whether or not that will continue, that tiny change will succeed. Overall, same day voter registration is still there, y'all. So please use it. But there have been changes to that. 747 also had kind of a voter purge rule changes. They're using faulty jury excusal records to try to identify and purge alleged non-citizen voters. And this is frankly just whipping up baseless xenophobia and to stigmatize undocumented communities and reduce their access to vote. Full stop. Senate Bill 747 also allows any voter in a county to challenge an absentee ballot, not just within their precinct. There's also a provision called a voter assistance log. It's a new requirement that say me, if I took my sister who is profoundly deaf to go vote and communicated to the poll worker and helped her with her ballot, I would have to sign a log. Now this is, clearly is targeting community leaders and targeting those who are helping those with disabilities. And there's frankly no good reason for it. There's also going to be a signature verification pilot program in 10 counties. When we were advocating through this bill in the legislature, it was originally, they were going to do signature verification on all of our ballots, and we got it whittled down to a pilot program to test it in the primary. We already have kind of the most robust verification system in the country for absentee ballot requests. Most states, you only have to have one signature or a notary. Our state requires 2 signatures. And to add signature verification on top of that is a lot. There also could be, and I'm going to, quotes, could be cuts to early voting, depending on the outcome of Senate Bill 747. And that bill, has to do with who gets to appoint our state and county boards of elections and putting them from an even number to an odd number. With moving them from an odd number of seats to an even number of seats, excuse me. And gridlock could create a situation where the statutory minimum of one early voting location per county could happen. We have not seen that yet, but it is something to pay attention to. And this is obviously pending litigation on 747. So next I'm talk a little bit about election subversion. This is kind of a new piece in the democracy advocacy sector. We are seeing ways in which the attempts at kind of like tinkering at some of the democratic systems of how our elections work that could potentially aid election subversion efforts. So 747 prioritizes the rights of partisan poll observers over the rights to have like a safe and secure voting environment that is free from intimidation. So with all the extra parties that we have now, you're going to see more poll observers in there, and they're going to have a more access than they have in the past. And we have concerns about what that means for intimidation. There was also a bill, you see access to voted ballots. We still have a short session coming up, so there is more to come on, democracy legislation. And this is one of those bills that's still alive, and I want to tell you about it because it's incredibly alarming. But it's a bill that grants access, like public records requests to voted ballots. Yeah, so a lot going on in the election subversion world. Next is, I know you guys are very clued into the gerrymandering, redistricting reform efforts, and so I'm not going to go into detail on this, but you know that the North Carolina Supreme Court again reheard a case that had already been decided and changed the outcome of that case so that our legislature could partisan gerrymander to their heart's content, and we got new maps. And we're working off of new maps. Now, there's multiple pieces of litigation on this moving right now. The likelihood that it will change the current 2024 maps, very, very, very low. So the maps that you see are the maps that we're going to be participating in 2024, but there is still pending litigation. Next is structural democracy. And I talked a little bit about this when I was talking about Senate Bill 749. First, we're going to see Senate Bill 747 has a ban on prohibiting private money in elections. In 2020, you saw, because of the pandemic, some grants being written to like county boards of elections, state boards of elections for like single-use pens, PPE, things of that, because we were in, guess what, a global pandemic, and we needed some help. That there's been a movement across the country to ban that in the future. And this was snuck into state budget because that's exactly where what we should be doing in our state budget. Next is it was in Senate Bill 747 and the budget. There was basically kind of changes to the firing of county election directors. There was changes to the appointment process for state and county boards of elections. This is also pending litigation because it's something they've tried before we've gone through multiple iterations of, let's change the makeup of the state board of elections, county boards of elections, and multiple versions of lawsuits. There was a constitutional amendment on this that y'all voted down in 2018. But the gist of this version is that the legislature should get to a point who is on our state and county boards of elections. And it should be 50% Democrats, 50% Republicans. The kind of interesting part about that right now is like the legislature still gets to make those appointments. And so the pending litigation is that the State Board of Elections is under the governor's purview. He should get to make those decisions. And a 3-judge panel made up of 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat already shot it down and is moving through the appeals process. The legislature also granted themselves some really interesting new investigative powers that some have argued could, be wielded against political enemies. I've heard news stories call them the secret police. We don't know what this really means yet because they haven't engaged in it. So it was just something to be on the watch for and to think about what that means kind of moving forward. So next is fair courts. So I've talked a little bit about this, but we elect our judges in the state. We have trial court judges, your district and superior court judges, your court of appeals elected statewide, and your Supreme Court elected statewide. There have been multiple attempts over the last decade to tinker with how we choose our judges. There was attempts to kind of have retention elections, which got voted down. There was, conversations about legislative appointment for judges. And, this was all bumping up against, frankly, some issues with our Constitution saying that, we get to elect our judges. So in the budget, they snuck in a whole bunch of really challenging aspects to attacks to fair courts, just full stop. They now raising the mandatory retirement age from 72 to 76 isn't really, an attack on judicial independence. It was done as a political motivation because Chief Justice Newby would turn 72 before the end of the next term. Now, what is an attack on judicial independence? And frankly, the fox guarding the henhouse is the creation of 10 special Superior Court judges to be appointed by the legislature to, guess what, decide whether or not the legislature's laws are constitutional or not. Yeah, it's not supposed to work like that, y'all. They've also eliminated the appeal to to the Supreme Court based on dissent. We're also looking at kind of, there's a little paragraph slipped into the budget that shields lawmakers from public records requests. There was pretty severe changes made to the North Carolina Judicial Standards Commission. This has been in the news right now because there's 2 ways to remove a judge in the state. One is through impeachment through the legislature. One is through the Judicial Standards Commission. There have been rumors about, impeaching Chief Justice Anita Earls. We dealt with that like 2 years ago. Now she is currently being brought up before the North Carolina Judicial Standards Commission. And in the budget, they changed the makeup of the Judicial Standards Commission to give more of the appointments to the legislature. Lastly, changes allow the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court justice to carry firearms on the bench because this is evidently the Wild Wild West. Next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about protecting the right to protest or protecting dissent. We saw a major protest bill called House Bill 40 that changes a lot of the rules around how we protest and, at what point, do we be charged in a protest. So, we have been trying to stop this for a couple cycles now. I will be honest and tell you this was a direct result of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. Speaker Moore from his penthouse in Raleigh observed the protest and was like, nope, we're changing the laws. So, I very much considered an anti-Black Lives Matter bill. There's also other versions of kind of anti-protecting dissent legislation known as ESG bills. And we saw one of those this year. It wasn't as bad as it was in other states. ESG, environmental social governance, is like, say, a corporation decides to put a policy in place, saying they want to be, more socially conscious, governance practice, environmental practices, and they have to do with the treasurer's pensions and all of that, then the government wants to step in and say no. You've probably heard about this as woke capitalism. Next, we've also saw several pieces of legislation that have to do with our Article 5 Constitutional Convention. Our country has never had an Article 5 Constitutional Convention since its founding. Nobody really knows what would happen if we did have one. The prevailing thought is that it would open up the whole Constitution to revision. And so there were bills to do a full Article 5 convention. There was bills to just have congressional term limits. There was also the strange thing about faithful commissioner rules. So this is still moving. And there is I'll just be honest, there's a lot of wealthy donors and corporations and radical actors who are pushing and calling for an Article 5 convention to kind of reshape our Constitution somewhat, potentially for their benefit. Lastly is constitutional amendments. I expect these in the short session, and I expect them to be on the ballot in 2024. So I just want to prepare you guys for that and say that that is a possibility. There have been versions of constitutional amendments filed, but based on the fact that our legislature is now a supermajority, it is incredibly easy to put one of these on the ballot. So, and then generally outside of the scope of democracy, this past year, this long session, and what we saw, whether it be the legislature, the courts, we saw kind of a restricting of rights and freedoms. Many of you guys were around when we saw the restricting reproductive rights. This is actually a picture of me taking my daughter to one of the protests on that. We saw an attempt to weaken our public schools with vouchers. I'm a mom, I'm a PTA mom. I've had kids in the public school for the last 15 years. I've seen firsthand what it's like when our schools are starving for resources. Right now, we actually have a really bad teacher shortage. And, my youngest didn't even have a teacher for most of kindergarten because of the teacher shortage. It was that bad. And so to weaken our public schools even more with this voucher scheme is pretty outrageous. We also saw legislation about expanding access to guns, attacks on LGBTQ students, Parent Bill of Rights, controlling what books students can read, changes on what teachers can teach and say or do or think. But we got Medicaid expansion, so that's the general overview of this session. But another bright spot is we actually filed several pieces of pro-democracy legislation. And so after I finish this, I'll put a kind of a one-pager on these in the chat so you guys can dig into them. We had a bill that's been filed before but expanded. It's called Fix Our Democracy. It is a very, very, very comprehensive bill that has all the different elements of voting rights, redistricting reform, judicial independence, the money in politics smack dab in there. Great ideas about how to reform those. We also have a bill called the Safeguard Fair Elections Act. This came out of 2020 and the kind of rise in election denierism and attacks on election workers and things of that nature, and why we needed to move forward and put pen to paper thoughts to handle that. We also saw like a version of that. It was more comprehensive and put together. They select pieces of it. It was called Freedom to Vote. And we also saw redistricting, a solo bill on redistricting reform called the Fair Maps Act. And now, if you want to learn about all the great ideas that there are to reforming and making a stronger democracy, I'm going to also put this into the chat. We have a report that we put out every 2 years called A Blueprint for a Stronger Democracy. And we take what's current about our election laws and we come up with best practices and policy proposals to basically improve voting, combat corruption, and promote good governance. And these do cover everything from election infrastructure to voting rights to money in politics to judicial independence and so forth. So I will get a link to that report for all of you guys next. And lastly, thank you guys for having me here today. You can learn a little bit more about us and our work at northcarolinaforthepeople.com. We, like I said, are in the middle of a name change. So our C4 is North Carolina for the People Action. Our C3 is North Carolina for the People. And thank you so much for having me with you guys today.
Thank you, Melissa. That was just grand. Scary and alarming, but I see that you ended on a positive note about that some things are being done to kind of negate some of these scary prospects. We'll go to the Q&A now. I'm going to stop the recording. So at this point,